So Melbourne or Victoria is, you can't go to Victoria, and Victoria had a whole bunch of cases that flew in, but it's locked off from the rest of the country. Very, very, just, yeah, it's actually very German. No, you can't come.
Good. It will work. If it's German way, then it will work. It will work. Very good. So I'm putting us live now.
No problems.
Very good. Now we're on YouTube. Very good. Change host. Fantastic. So here we go. Okay. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us from all the way from Australia. The first question I always ask the people is, what was the last minute before the race starts? So normally you're in the water, you're just standing outside the water, getting ready. What goes through your head in the last minute before the race starts?
Well, firstly, I've been retired for a long time, so I've got to go back.
Okay.
So, but I was always, I thoroughly enjoyed the racing. I loved the anxiety of the days before. And in fact, now that I'm retired, it's probably the thing I miss the most, is that is something meaning so much to you. And I think the last thing I was thinking, usually in the water, and for me, the swim was always the discipline I had to work the hardest on. And, I was always a good swimmer as a kid, but I think the level of swimming just got better and better and better year after year when the big swimmers started to move across to the sport. So for me, I was always looking for the right athletes to position myself around, and trying to make sure I got a really dynamic start and was on the right feet or the right hip to ensure that I was as close to the front as possible. So the excitement of the build up and the race was there, but for me it was about strategy. And of course you have that underpinning nerves, but I enjoyed that. It was I was very, at that point, looking to be around the right people and making sure they could help me through the discipline that, if of the three, I felt the most vulnerable in.
Very cool, very good. I think there's not much to explain about you, but I still want to take the time to go through your career and tell the listeners a little bit about it. So you're 47 years young, married to Emma Jane, and you have two girls who are with you now in Australia. You have been 2 times Australian junior titles. You won them. You were World Championships in Manchester and England, 1993. You finished first place. And then you won almost everything there was to win. 1979 ITU World Championships with 23, ITU World Cup, Goodwill Games, gold. 2 times Hawaii Ironman World Championship, gold, ITU Gold Championships. You won 35 races straight wins in ITU. You ranked ITU World #1 for more than 26 months in total. You're now a CEO of Bahrain 13 Endurance Team. You're co-founder of the amazing Super League Triathlon Series. You have been voted 2011 as Forbes named one of the world's greatest athletes. You're behind the Phoenix Foundation. I think that's just an amazing achievement, amazing career. So welcome to Wolfi Talks, Macca, Chris McCormack.
Thank you. It's great to be here. We've known each other for quite some time now. I remember walking into the bike store in the 90s,
Yes.
It's incredible. So it's great to be.
Where did the name Macca come from?
Macca is a very, in Australia, we have a tendency to give everybody a nickname. Australians are relatively lazy with their language. We have terrible English. And so McCormack, most McCormacks or Mackenzies or McCarthys, we just are called Macca. So in fact, Paul McCartney, the Beatle, is called Macca as well. So because I'm McCormack, growing up, I was a Macca. My brother's a Macca. There's lots of Maccas in Australia, but it just, when I got into triathlon, I was the only Macca at the time. And it sort of, all the Aussies were calling me that, and it sort of stuck with the Europeans, and it became synonymous with myself. So it's difficult because Luke McKenzie, who was also a fantastic triathlete in his own right, he's actually a Macca as well, but he came into triathlon and he says the same story. He's like, everyone, all his friends in Australia call him Macca, but in triathlon, he's not known as Macca because I'd already taken that name. So
it was already covered.
It's just a thing. Yeah,
very
exactly.
We have a graphic designer working in our team, Will, and he always enjoys thoroughly to prepare a little clip that we can show some scenes of your career. And I will ask Will to take over the screen and show us these clips. And thank you, Will. good. Very cool.
Wow,
Thanks, Will.
another life.
Yeah.
Seems like an eternity ago.
Oh, very cool. It must be amazing when you look back what you have done and what you have achieved, and now what you're doing right now with Bahrain 13 and everything. So how is it looking back? What was the first inspiration? When did you start getting into the sport?
Yeah, for me, growing up in Australia, we grew up on the beaches here. Australia is a big place. Everyone sort of lives on the coast, and my father was very focused on. I have an older brother and a younger brother. There's three boys. Very education driven. So sport was not the career path he was. I think he had planned for me, but when I was going through high school, I was very good. I was a good runner. I don't know why. I just happened to be able to run quite well, and basically when Australia won the Sydney Olympic Games, the bid to win the Sydney Olympics in 2000, there was a talent identification program happening within Australia. And I was one of the athletes that was identified as having quite good physiology. And they sort of migrated me out of running into the sport of triathlon. And that was when I realized I potentially had the possibility of having a career in sport, but my father was not excited about that at all. He was determined that I would, maintain my education, go to university, hopefully get a PhD. I completed my master's, but I never did my PhD, and both my other brothers did. So that's sort of the family laugh we have now over Christmas. And I have two doctors as brothers, and I'm the non-doctor of the family. But yeah, I fell by chance. I think it's just a series of luck. I had some talent, but it was luck that Australia won the Olympic Games. This talent identification program happened within Australia. I was identified and I was given access to exceptional training with the Australian Institute of Sport that sort of gave me the opportunity to learn and fast track a career in triathlon, which at the time triathlon was
not.
A very small sport, but once it got to the Olympic Games and that sort of happened, that it just became my life, and it all went from there.
You pretended to go to work, and your father dropped you off, and then you went back for training. Is this?
Yes, yeah. When I graduated university, I took a job at Bankers Trust which was a big private bank, and I hated my job. And I was watching a lot of athletes that I'd been racing with in Australia that were now moving to Europe, and on the cycling side, Stuart O'Grady and Robbie McEwen and all these guys that were at the Australian Institute of Sport together, and I'm watching them in Europe. I thought they're having the coolest life in the world, and here I am stuck in Sydney. And so I opted to quit my job, and I thought I'm going to sell everything I own and move to Europe and just try my hand at being a professional. And I was too scared to tell my father because he was, going to be bitterly disappointed that I was pursuing a career in sport as opposed to a career in banking. But I quit my job. I told my boss that I wasn't coming into work anymore. He laughed and told me I was a dreamer. But it took me 2 weeks to pluck up the courage to tell my father that I'd quit my job. So, and he used to take me to work 3 days a week on his way to work. And so I used to put my suit back on, even though I didn't have a job to go to, get in the car with my father, drive to a job I no longer had. Then I'd catch the train back home, go training all day, put my suit back on, catch the train back to where he would pick me up. And so, yeah, until I finally plucked up the courage in 95 to tell him that I'd sold everything and I moved to France, flew over there alone and didn't come home until the next time I stood foot in Australia, I was a world champion, 2.5 years later.
Wow, very cool. Very good. As well, Robert de Castella, a marathon runner, a famous marathon runner, was part of your inspiration to start running. I think it was Olympic Games.
Yeah, without question. I think, Australia, it was, we prior to 84, the 80 Olympics, 84, 88, we had a lot of intentions of doing really successfully at the Olympics, but we used to win 3 or 4 Olympic gold medals. So Australia knew every single Olympic champion. There were household names in this country. And Robert de Castella was a marathon runner who was just so famous in Australia. And he won the world championships in 1983. I was 10 years of age, and we all woke up in Australia and watched him win that race. And then he was dominating. He was the favorite to win the Los Angeles Olympics in the marathon. He ended up 5th. And I recall watching the Los Angeles Olympics and saying to my father, I just want to be a marathon runner like Robert de Castella. And my dad's like, you're too big. I said, yeah, but Robert de Castella's a big guy, he's a big athlete as well. And my father was like, look, just keep running, get a university scholarship, and we'll talk about that in the future. But yeah, he was a huge inspiration, and having the opportunity to meet Deke later on as I aged, and he was just such a wonderful champion and a wonderful mentor and role model to young athletes in Australia. And I think if you spoke to any of the Olympic champions now out of Australia, or especially between the ages of 40 and above, Deke would be at the top of all their lists of inspiration, because he not only was he a great runner, he was a great champion, and he really inspired young people. He was just gave people time and help pave the way for Australian dominance in sport over the next 3 or 4 Olympic cycles.
Very cool. And I think this is nice when did you meet him later? Did you read him?
Yeah, many times. As I said, yeah, many times. I would call him a close friend now. He's a marvelous man. Yeah, wonderful man. And still to this day, he does a lot of charity work now with Aboriginals in Australia, getting them into running. And he's an incredible man, an incredible man, a great champion.
You told him that he is part of the inspiration?
Yeah, I think I have. He's an inspiration to people like Ian Thorpe and so many athletes. Very would cool. Put top of there. He's a 1 in a million type person. He's incredible.
Very good. We get to this later, when obviously your inspiration for the sport now, the amazing work you do with Super Triathlon Series and everything like this. So we get to this bit where your brothers are quite big boys as well. I think they're both 100 kilos. So you're kind of the smaller guy. So triathlon, when you see the rest of the family being so big, you going into triathlon, running doesn't really seem to be the correct sport, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, my mother was a Maori, so she's Polynesian. So if we were ever going to play any sport, it was supposed to be rugby, right? So my brother's 110 kilos, and my younger brother's 110 kilos, and my older brother's about 105, all muscle. And I think why I was probably good at triathlon was, I think when I get fat very easy now, so I'm always watching what I eat. But I think because I'm probably have the frame of a 100-kilo man, but I was always operating at 75 kilos. So I always think of a car with an engine size, an 8-cylinder engine, but you put it in a 4-cylinder, a much lighter framed car, it goes a lot quicker. So I think once I was able to get my weight under control and bring that weight down, I think that was my big advantage within the sport of triathlon. And I think I had the heart and lungs of a bigger man, but weight was something that in my career was something I was always focused on. And I used to always envy. Sometimes I used to think I wish I picked another sport, because a lot of the athletes, for me to get to 75 kilo, 76 kilo, I had eating disorders and would just not eat. And I was just constantly focused on weight. And I'd see people that naturally existed in this 60 kilo range. And I had to compete against that. But it was just part and parcel of the game. And I did enjoy that whole process. I say to people now that I am the master of losing weight. If you ever want to lose weight, I can get weight off people like that. I'm the king of it.
Okay. I have to get some more tips for that later. I think this is a big issue here in the Middle East. There are people struggling keeping their weight down. You were representing your surf club in South Africa, and from there you went to Paris, and from Paris you went to Australia, to Canada. So can you give us a quick story? This is a cool story.
Yeah. Look, the surf club scene in Australia, surf clubs are the life-saving clubs that exist on the beaches within Australia, and it's the biggest volunteer and biggest youth organization in the country. There's 750,000 kids compete for surf clubs every weekend in the summer. It's huge. And so growing up, I was in the surf club, and I went through the surf club scene. I was selected for Australia to represent Australia at the World Surf Lifesaving Championships in South Africa, in Durban, South Africa. And you represent your club even though you're part of the Australian team. And I went across there, and that was the opportunity I saw, because the surf club paid for the trip. So I thought, okay, I'll go to South Africa. I'll fly up to Paris and become a professional triathlete. So I went over there, raced a 2K beach run and a few swimming events, and then moved to France and raced the World Cup Series. I ended up arriving in Paris. I knew nobody. I caught a train down to Gap in the southeast of France in the Alps, and right near Briançon, and for the cyclist col d'Izoire and all these amazing alpine climbs. I based there and started training on my own and going out and climbing these mountains. In Australia, we just do not have alpine climbs. I think the biggest climb in Australia is probably 10 kilometers long, right? So to see for the first time in my life, the Alps and the Pyrenees was just incredible. I just couldn't get off my bike. I loved running and riding there. And I built this engine. I went and raced in Paris, had a really great race. And I met the president of the ITU, a gentleman called Les McDonald, who asked who I was. He'd never heard of me because I said, look, I'm Chris McCormack. I'm from Australia. And, he said, oh, well, look, you finished fifth in a World Cup today. You've won $3,000. Would you like to come to Canada next weekend in Drummondville? And I said, look, I can't afford to go to Canada. And, I've got to ask my federation and all these things. He's like, look, I'm the president of the ITU. I make the decisions. If you'd like to come to Canada, I'd like to fly you over. And I'd like you to compete in the World Cup in Canada. We're looking for the new stars of the future with the Sydney Olympics coming. And I've never seen a kid come and be so successful first up. And literally, I took the opportunity to fly to Canada. I'd never been. And I won that World Cup the following week. So my second ever World Cup, I won it. I beat all Brad Bevan and all my idols. And I won 10 grand. That sort of launched my career. And I was a 22-year-old kid who's now number 6 in the world, and I landed myself in the Australian system of triathlon and was just sort of discovered, as I say, by chance. I tell a lot of people, luck and being at the right place at the right time is, I could have gone any way. If I didn't go to that Paris race, I may never have met Les McDonald. I may never have gone to Canada, and your whole career could be different. So, yeah, it was, there's a bunch of little stories like that when you get older and you retire and you reflect and you think, wow, geez, I was right place, right time. Is it destiny, or is it just luck? And that's the forever question you'll ask yourself until you die.
Very good. But then you won all these races, 35 races straight, 26 months on top of it. So what are the moments you remember from that straight of wins?
Yeah, I think I think transitioning into the professional ranks, when a lot of those people were were people you were watching on television, and I think back to Simon Lessing and Greg Welsh and Brad Bevan, the big European guy, Spencer Smith. They were amazing stars, and I used to read about them in the magazines. And suddenly, I'm lining up with them, and you still see yourself as a young junior kid from Australia with dreams and aspirations, but you have to start seeing yourself as a real player. And a lot of athletes take some time to adapt to that. And I think I was one of those athletes, but I had a conversation with Brad Bevan, who's an iconic Australian champion. And after I'd won a big race in the south of France in Ush, he's like, kid, you're strong for a young guy. And I said, oh yeah, but like you guys are really, really good, and I just want to be as good as you one day. He's like, there is no one day. One day is today. You don't take time trying to be somebody now. I said, and his exact words to me were, if they're calling you a prodigy, which they were at the time, a young prodigy, a potential star. He said, when they call you a prodigy, it means that you haven't won anything. It's when they start calling you a champion, means something, because champions are the people that win. So start trying to identify yourself as a champion, and don't worry about my name or anyone's name. Just go out and beat us. And that was sort of this light went on in my head and went, okay, if Brad Bevan thinks I can beat him, then maybe I can. And I went on this rampage, and I moved right up and took over the world '1 ranking in 97. And by the end of 97, I won the world championship, which was the first time an Australian had won in 12 years. And it was full speed ahead then. In 98, I was dominating all over in Europe again. I was winning the French Grand Prix, and I was just having the time of my life. And I was really pumped and excited for my Sydney Olympics, is coming home for Sydney and being ready to win that event. And it just didn't go that way. My mother fell ill in 99 and with cancer, and I was based in Europe, and I just won the first selection race for the Australian Olympic team in Japan, and I was supposed to go on to the next few races to be picked for the team. And when I rang home to tell my family that I'd won, my younger brother was on the phone. He said, you need to come home, and you need to come home now. Mum's really ill. And she didn't want to tell me because she wanted me to go to the games. And I went home and I spent a couple of less than 10 days with her, and until she passed, and I was devastated. She was a massive part of my life, and massive part of, when you have all boys, your mum is your life, right? She just spoiled her boys to death. And I felt I just struggled with who I was and what my choices in life, and whether I'd been selfish in pursuing this triathlon career and living overseas and and I should have done what they wanted me to be and stayed working. And so I sort of dropped out for 6 months. And because of that, the Australian Federation didn't think that I was in the right headspace to win an Olympic medal. So they opted to leave me off the team. And you know, at the time I was world number one and left off the team, and I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. But looking back now, I probably wasn't in the right headspace. You know, you know, your mum's passed away three months before an Olympic Games. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. But that made you move then from ITU, you moved into long distance events, and there was no 70.3 at that time. So it was really going from a 40-kilometer cycle to a 180-kilometer cycle, from a 2-hour event to an 8-hour event. So that was quite a big step. So you started with Ironman long course.
Yeah, I sort of, well, in 2000, when they left me off the team, my mum passed in April, and they announced the team and I wasn't on it. But they said, oh, you should come to the Olympics to experience it, and we should focus on Athens. And I said, no, I'm done. I'm never speaking to you guys again. And I opted to move to the United States, and I had a whole bunch of sponsors, and I started racing short course events in the United States. But they weren't ITU races. They were just big money races to some degree, and relatively speaking, in triathlon. And because of that move to the United States, Ironman starts to come on the radar, because in the US, nothing else matters except Ironman. And basically in 2001, I had my best ever short course season. I was world number one again. I won the Goodwill Games. I won 4 of the World Cups. I won the World Cup Series. And the Federation came back to me and asked me if I would come back into the national program to prepare for Athens. And I said, look, I don't want to give you 3 years of my life again. If you put me in Athens now, I will win. Like, give me and they said, we can't do that. And my answer was, look, I'm not coming back into the program. And they said, well, what else are you going to do? You're going to do Ironman. You're 27. You're too young, right? 28. And I said, that's exactly what I'll do. I'll do Ironman. And I entered 2002. I entered my first Ironman in Australia. And like you said, it was a huge jump. There was no 70.3. So, you know, it was, I wish there was a 70.3 series, because it would have been a much nicer transition, a much easier way to learn this longer racing. So my first Ironman was here in Australia. I wanted to come home and have my brothers and my father sharing the experience, and everyone, Jürgen Zach was racing, and Lothar Leder, and back then there was like 12 Ironmans in the world. So every Ironman had everyone in it, and in order to qualify for Kona, each Ironman would allocate 4 or 5 spots. So most pros would come to Australia in the winter, and the Ironman Australia or Ironman New Zealand were 2 big races. So I had Olivier Bernard, and it was Peter Reid, who was the current world champion racing. Tim de Boom was racing. And in my first Ironman, I won it. And I remember thinking, this Ironman stuff is, you know, it's going to be easy. But I do recall going through like about the first 4 hours of the race thinking, this is the easiest sport in the world. And I got off the bike, and I had a big lead, me and a guy called Craig Walton. And I had a 12-minute lead on Peter Reid and all the Ironman stars. And I ran through halfway in 76 minutes so I was on pace to run like a 2:30 marathon, and I blew to pieces. I absolutely exploded. I was gone, and it was the most difficult hour I'd ever experienced in my life. I was just completely hit the wall and bonked, but I just had enough of a gap to hang on. Olivier Bernard missed me. I had at the halfway mark of the marathon, I was 10 minutes in front, and I only beat him by like 45 seconds. So I lost a lot of time in the second half of the marathon. And I ran a 2:57 marathon, which I remember seeing Mark Allen and these guys run 2:40s, and I couldn't understand how you could run that quick in an Ironman. But yeah, I took that spot to go to Kona, and that was sort of the momentum going forward on my long course racing. And I was just I look back now, I was so raw, and I had no idea. You know, I did nothing right. And the perfect example of that was in ITU racing, and this is how dumb and raw I was. We used to take 1 gel on the bike. So my headspace was, okay, Ironman is 4 times the length of an Olympic distance race. Then my nutrition is 4 gels. So in my first ever Ironman, I had 4 gels. That's it in a whole Ironman. And, you know, I learned later that was just idiotic, but that was about as much thought that I put into nutrition in my Ironman debut. And because I won, probably the problem was because I won with 4 gels, I never asked the questions that I probably should have. had I failed, I probably would have asked more questions. And it wasn't until I had those Kona failures where you are exposed that I started to ask those questions and finally got around to finding some success in Kona, but not as quickly as I had anticipated.
Kona, I read some things you said was a humble pie. So you had 5 years, and then in year number 6, you finally succeeded. So that's a long of learning and a long, but I think it's maybe great for your career and great for your mindset. But can you take us to the years 2002 and until 2000?
Easily, yeah. The one thing about Kona is that they're like a tattoo. They scar you forever. You remember every race vividly, and both the good ones and the bad ones. And in 2002, and it's an important. That was my debut in Kona, and I'd only done one Ironman, and I'd won it. I'd done one half Ironman, and I'd won it in Wildflower. So I was very raw, but I honestly believed I was going to win it because I hadn't lost a race in 3 years. And so there was a lot of momentum and a lot of hype around me. And I recall swimming really well. I got caught on the bike by Jürgen Zach, who's a great German Uber biker, amazing athlete back in the day, and a gentleman called Thomas Hellriegel, another German who was a big hero of mine. And I remember we just rode the bike. I was so excited to be riding with these superstar Ironman athletes. And I knew Thomas because I'd been watching him. I watched him win the 97 Ironman. And thought, one day I want to be him. So to be sharing the bike, he was such a big biker. So to be riding with him and doing my share, I just felt really, really good. And we opened up a 14-minute lead on the field. And I got off the bike. The three of us got off the bike. Jürgen couldn't run out of the tent. That's how hard we rode the bike. His back had seized up, so he didn't run out of the tent. And I ran off, and I thought I was going to win Kona because Peter Reed and Tim de Boom, who had won the last few Konas, were 13 minutes behind us. And I'm thinking, nobody can run 13 minutes. It's impossible. And but I'd never experienced the heat or the humidity or the exposure of Kona in my life. And I ran down a leaky drive, and I high-fived my father, thinking, at 3 miles with 23 miles to go, that I was going to win. And literally 6 miles later, I was walking, and 3 miles after that, I couldn't put one foot in front of the other, and I was out. And I recalled Thomas running past me as I was sitting down and grabbed me and said, "Walk, finish." And I said I couldn't, and I watched him go on. So my first Kona I didn't finish, and I didn't really understand the importance of finishing in an Ironman because it was all new to me, and I got absolutely abused by a lot of the amateurs saying, I need to finish no matter what. And so I was like, okay, that's a lesson learned. And the following year, I went back again. I won Ironman Australia again, and I opted to do another Ironman in 2003, thinking I want to learn a little bit more about this nutrition thing. And I did Roth in Germany, and I had a sprint finish with Lothar Leder, who had won that race four times in a row. So I'm thinking, oh look, I'm with all the big boys now. I'm going to win Kona, no problems. And I went to Kona the next year, and again I rode away on the bike. It was the windy year of 2003, and I got away. There was a group up the road that dropped me late, but there was only 2 of them, and I got off. But I walked to the finish that year. I blew up on the marathon, exposed in the heat. Despite, at halfway I was in 3rd place, and by the end of the marathon I walked to the finish and finished like in 40th place or something. I don't even 9.5 hours, but I finished, and I was devastated. I couldn't work out what I was doing wrong, and I thought it must be nutrition because I still was struggling with vomiting, and you start to listen to all the negative stuff. You start thinking maybe I'm too big for the heat, and this nutrition thing. When you fail, you start to look for. Most athletes try and find a reason why they failed, and a lot of the time, if you don't really delve deep enough and you just find a reason that satisfies your own ego, which I think I did back then, it's detrimental to your progress. And for me, it was like, the reason why I didn't win this year, because I had such a great year, was because I need to get a little bit skinnier, because you always blame weight, and I need to learn this nutrition thing a little bit more. So I left that race and went in 2004. I came back to Australia, and I got married to my current wife, and I went to the Australian Institute of Sport to learn about nutrition. And I had a fantastic season in 2004. I won Ironman Australia again. I won Wildflower again. I won hour races. I went to Roth and won and broke 8 hours and ran a 2:40 marathon. And I'm like, man, I'm going to win Kona this year. It's 3rd time lucky. And I'd been at the Australian Institute of Sport, and they probed me and put me in heat chambers and measured my sweat rate and did all these amazing things and gave me what I thought was the perfect nutrition program to win Kona. And I tell this story to a lot of amateurs I talk to now, because I really went to Kona that year thinking I ticked every box. And in the race, I had an horrific swim. For some reason, I just felt weak all day, but I was following this strict routine of nutrition. I got on the bike and I was riding and I got dropped on the bike and I was vomiting and throwing up the whole way out, but still trying to eat this food that the sports scientists had told me to do. And I was never been so far behind in the race ever before in my life. And I quit. I was halfway out towards Harvey and I'm like, I'm done. I'm going back to ITU. I'm going back to the Olympics. I can't do this. I'm done. I've done everything right this year. And I always bring up Thomas Hellriegel. He came riding up to me. He'd had a flat tire. And I just happened to finish throwing up on the bike. I was about 90 kilometers into the bike ride. And I was about to climb off my bike. And Thomas came. He said, Macca, what are you doing? I said, I'm done, Thomas. I'm finished. I'm sick. He said, well, stop drinking electrolytes. Stop, drink Coke and water. You've had too much electrolyte. And I said, I'm out, Thomas. He said, no. You have to ride back to town anyway. Ride with me. And so I said, oh, okay. So I took off these 2 bottles that the sports scientists had given. I threw them away. And Thomas handed me we went through the aid station, gave me a bottle of Coke from the aid station and a water. And I just had Coca-Cola and water. From that point, I rode all the way back into town with Thomas. We started catching up a lot of the athletes. I started to feel really, really good. And then I ran a super fast marathon, the fastest marathon of the day, 2:48, and ran myself into 6th place. But I was only 40 seconds from 3rd. And after the race, Thomas came up to me and said, wow, man, like, where'd you find that? And I said, dude, you're amazing. He's like, welcome to Ironman. You never know what's going to happen. You have to ride the storms out. And that was when I started to realize I was heading the right way. But the interesting story is after that race, finishing, I think 6th that year, the Australian Institute of Sports people rang me and said, look, we got the nutrition right. See what happens when you start doing things right. And I said, look, everything you told me to do, whenever I did that, I felt terrible. And everything you told me not to do, you told me not to drink Coca-Cola, you told me not to drink too much water. When I did that, I had the best race I'd ever had. So there's obviously this flexibility you have to have in nutrition, and having a framework of what you need to do is important, but understanding and trying to read what that looks like as the race is unfolding is important. And athletes like Thomas Hellriegel at that point were just such experienced racers that had been there so many times, and they passed that experience across to me. And that really changed 2005 changed my life. And I came back in 2006 and had the great war with Norman Stadler and almost won the race for the big marathon again. And it was sort of the progression where I started to build some confidence that I could potentially win this race. And 2006 for me was probably my best ever Kona race, even though I was beaten. I was magnificent that day, and I was beaten by the better guy. Norman had the race of his life. It was the beginning of, Norman was always a magnificent bike rider, one of the best that's ever done the sport. And he used to run, around 3 hours, but he'd set up this big margin of error on the bike. But that year in 2006, it was the beginning of the Blue 70 speed suits. Before that, we used to all just tuck our shirts into our speed suits, right? And Norman came out with his wetsuit looking speed suit. And I remember at the start of the race going, hey man, that's a wetsuit. You can't wear that. But it was legal, right? And the next year, everybody had them. But Norman was the first person to ever wear a Blue 70 speed suit. And he got out of the water with us that year. And literally, he used to spend the first 60 or 70 kilometers catching up, but now he got out of the water with myself and Faris and Chris Lieto and all the stars, and instantly he went to the front of the bike and was gone. And so that sort of set up the race for him, and he rode a bike course record that day. And I still at that point thought, Norman always runs 3 hours. I'm going to run 2:45 or better. I can give him 10 to 15 minutes. And he got off the bike at 10 minutes or 11 minutes in front. And I thought I had this one, but he delivered a 2:55 marathon and won the race. And he beat me by 71 seconds in one of the closest Konas ever. And I was destroyed. I've never pushed myself as hard as that. I've never suffered as much as that. I collapsed across the finish line. I ended up in the medical tent and got, 2 liters of IV pumped into me. And my father was there at the race, and he was there. I just had my second daughter was born, and my father said to me, "What are you doing this for? You don't need this sport in your life. It's too hard," And I said, "Look, Dad, I just want to win this race once, and I'm done," And so I committed to going back in 2007, and that was the year it all sailed and went really, really well, and I won the race. It was beautiful, a beautiful race.
Yeah, fantastic. I saw the footage when the helmet didn't close and you were screaming, saying, "No, it can't go, God, it has to close."
Yeah.
On the bike and everything, and you tripped over a volunteer.
Yes, yeah. The anxiety of it, because to top it all off, and Norman and I are very close now. Had someone told me during our racing career that Norman Stadler and we would be good friends post our career, I would never have believed it. I would have thought I was friends with other people, but it's just two guys that are so similar, right? That want the same thing, that just at that moment in time clash. And after that 2006 race, we had a bit of a fight, an argument in between. I think I personally, no, I don't blame the Germans, but you need to look at one. Norman had won in 2004. Faris had won in 2005, and 2006. It was more Faris and Norman having this rivalry in 2006, and Norman won that fight, and I sort of split both of them on the podium. So the podium was Norman, myself, and Faris, and I think I was sort of they sort of had this German conversation, and Faris had said a few things that I think, I was glad you beat Chris. He didn't do much work in the group, and so Norman actually verbalized that in an interview with Triathlon magazine, and someone had showed me the interview as we came off the stage from the presentation, and I read it on a BlackBerry. It was sort of the beginning of smartphones, and I couldn't believe that Norman had said this about me, because I was so happy to finish second, and I'd known Norman since I was a junior, and so I said, "Where is he? I want to speak to him." And I was looking everywhere at the parties and everything, and I found him at the triathlete party, and I walked into this party, and I said, "Hey, Norman, can I have a conversation with you?" And he's like, "If you have anything to say, you say it here in front of everybody." And I said, "Yeah, okay, I have something to say. Why did you say all that stuff about me in the interview you just did?" He's like, "Well, I don't respect you nearly caught me, and I think you didn't do enough work in the I said, in the group." I said, "Well, how would you know? You were up the road. How would you know what I did?" And we basically we had a big argument. I said, "Look, mark my words, I'm going to retire you from triathlon. You will never beat me again as long as you live. And the other one I'm going to beat forever is Faris. I'm going to destroy you. Germans are done. You'll never beat me again." And you know it. And it was a big fight. So in 2007, everywhere, whenever those two guys entered a race, I entered it. And so I think the first race I did in 2007, I flew to Dubai because Faris was in Dubai, and he was doing a little sprint race in Dubai. And I heard a friend of mine rang me and said, "Faris Al Sultan is racing here in Dubai." So I bought a ticket, flew to Dubai, went to this little race around Dubai Creek. Yeah. I turned up and said, "Hey, Faris, how you going?" And I think he was like, "What are you doing here?" I said, I'm going to kick your butt, mate. Like I told you, I'm going to retire you from triathlon. You'll never beat me again. And so I ended up beating him there, and we had a few verbal words. And this is sort of this rivalry that I created. And my wife, and then I did another race in Krakow against Norman, and I smashed Norman that day. And I was like, I got on this rampage of trying to prove a point. And then I went to Roth and won Roth again. And I'll never forget, I was leading Roth and I was on world record pace, and Norman was doing the television for the German television, and he was in the car in front of me while I was leading the race, and I whistled. I said, hey, and he's in the middle of an interview, like talking about me racing, and I said, "Are you watching this?" And he turned around and he looked at me. I said, in 14 weeks time, I'm going to kick your ass in Kona. And he's in the middle of television. And I could see he was looking at me like, this guy's crazy. Like, what is wrong with this guy? And then I just missed the world record. And then we went to Kona. And so my wife was really, really concerned about Kona. And that's why I think all this anxiety, because she actually said to me, you've gone too far. You're winding yourself up, and you're coming across like a jerk And I said, darling, I'm scared of these guys, right? Like I need them to think that I'm nuts, and I want them to second guess themselves, because last year I had the best race I've ever had. And whenever I've had those races in the past, I always win. Norman beat me. I can't go any better than that. I know that. That's the best I've got. So the only way I can beat these guys is to have them beat themselves, is for them to think this guy's crazy, this guy's incredible. Anyone who thinks this way must think they must be really, really good. And that's sort of what happened. Faris got sick and didn't start the day before, and Norman ended up vomiting on the bike and was out. And I went on to win that day. But I remember having that helmet issue because, you know, Faris, I didn't know Faris hadn't started the race. So I'm thinking I couldn't see him around me. So I'm like, oh, far out, he could be up the road. So you panic about things because seconds count, and there's all that anxiety, and then you nearly trip over the photographer, all these little things that draw up. But I tell everyone now, people are like, what's it like to win your first Kona? And I don't remember. I was so emotional. The monkey was off my back. I finally delivered there after so many years. The pressure that was on me that year was ridiculous. And I was so, if you see the finish photo, which we saw in the video, I didn't even take the sponges out of my zip up, because I was just so caught in the moment. So it was beautiful, but I don't really remember much of it. I remember knowing that I was going to win about 5 kilometers from home, and had a big lead. And then I celebrated a little bit early, and started to lose a bit of that lead. And my team sort of wrote up and said, hey, focus on getting to the finish line before you celebrate. And I focused, and winning it was just magnificent. Yeah, magnificent.
Very cool. But you said the finishing photo wasn't right because with all the sponges, so you had to come back to 2010 to get a proper finisher photo.
Yeah, it's true. I actually said that in my speech, and I hadn't even realized until I saw the photos after the race. I'm like, why didn't I take the sponges out? But I was in tears, and because, you know, I remember, if you watch the finish, I looked up to my mother, who I promised on her deathbed that I would win Hawaii for her. And I said, Mum, you've got to stay around. I'm going to win this Ironman. You've got to watch me win this Ironman. So I remember just looking up to her. I was just in tears. I was so emotional. And just those things. And I tell everybody, it was sort of despite chasing your whole life to win this race, it's just typical of me that the photo I had would always be with me with man boobs, I called them. And of course, when I came home to Australia, my brothers just gave me a hard time. We had a party at home, and everyone wore boobs, and it was the big joke in Australia. But it was a beautiful moment, and I think this is where Norman and I sort of mended our rivalry. We met each other after the race, and we actually talked about that exact thing, both wanting the same thing, and you appreciate the competitiveness and the fact that as an athlete, you know that you have a finite amount of time to deliver, and some athletes do, and some athletes don't, and you see that now. We always talk about, everyone's like, oh, who do you think's the next person that's going to win Kona, and who do you think the next person going to win the Tour de France? Yeah, it can be only one, and there's a lot of people that never do, and that's the anxiety that athletes face, and that was the anxiety that, I guess, why I respect, Faris and Norman and these guys, is we all wanted that one title, and we were going to tread on anyone that tried to get in the way.
But yet there's a nice shot with Andreas Relat, a handshake a few kilometers out, and then you had that amazing kind of sprint finish, only a few seconds in between you guys. That was 2010 when you won the second title.
Yeah. Well, sort of after 2007, I'd promised my wife that, you know, we had our second daughter. I have 2 daughters and a son, actually. So Sienna was born, and we'd been living abroad, and it was quite difficult. And I promised my wife we'd move home to Australia, and I'd look at potentially retiring. And you know, suddenly a year goes like that, because you spend a year after you win the title, you do all these talks with everybody, and you chase your sponsors and you secure your sponsors, and suddenly it's July again. And then suddenly it's October. And in 2008, I went to Kona, and I tried for the first time the Shimano, the prototype of the Shimano Di2. It was just and it failed on me that year. And I ended up leaving Shimano and going to another brand after that. So I didn't finish in 2008, and I was devastated. And an Australian, so I sort of fell in the same boat as Norman and Faris had, being 2 Germans, but an Australian called Craig Alexander, who is a superstar, went on to win that year. And I found that difficult because he won it on his third attempt, or second or third attempt. It'd taken me 6. And he was a training partner of mine. And I always thought I was a much better athlete than Craig. Personally, I thought that, right? And I'm thinking, far out, this guy's just won Kona like this. Like, and in Australia, he was a superstar. And suddenly there was the two of us. And I hadn't had the opportunity to finish the race. So there was a lot of conversation, well, what would have happened had Macca finished? And then some people were saying, well, you know, I don't think he would beat Craig anyway. So in 2009, I said, look, I'm going to come back and I need to come back. I said to my wife, I want to come back 2009. I'll win Kona. It's only Crowe. He's easy to beat. And then we'll retire in 2009. I promise we're retiring. So my wife said, okay, do that. So in 2009, I prepared and we were still in the States. And I went back and I had a terrible swim again. My Hawaii, my worst ever swim in Hawaii was in 2009. I was 4 minutes behind. I got out behind Norman that year. And luckily he became an ally, both Norman and another German, Mike Twelsick is a German biker as well. And we rode the house down. That was part of the Commerzbank team. And it took me 100 kilometers to catch the front group. And then I dropped the front group. I had a bit of a lead off the bike. And I fell apart about 20K into the marathon. I started walking a bit, getting myself together. And Craig and Andy Raylert ran past me. And I ended up fighting on, and I finished 4th from about 4 minutes from the lead. And now Craig Alexander had won 2 titles, and I'd won 1, right? And that was difficult for me to swallow because as an Australian, I was like, oh man, like far out, you know. But I promised my wife 2009 I was done, and so we went to Honolulu on a holiday after that race, and I was sitting on the beach, and my wife, I didn't really talk much. And my wife was like, is this what it's going to be like living with you for the next 30 years? I said, darling, had it been Andy Raylert or a young star, Jan Frodeno or someone like this, then maybe I could live with it, that it's a changing of the guard. But Craig's older than I am. He's 6 months older than me. And I've known him since I was a junior, and he's probably beaten me 5 times in my life. I can beat this guy. Like, I just had a bad swim. And in fact, if you put my swim with Craig where it always is, I win the race, you know, but no one wants to see that. That's why I actually said in my book, people watch results, not races, you know? And I said, if people watch a race, you see what happens within a race, the dynamics of a race, and people make races. And I had a fantastic race in 2009. I just had a shitty swim. And so my wife gave me the green light to come back in 2010. And I had a magnificent race and with Andy Raylert and you know, we got away on the bike, a group of 7 of us, and a big group of, you know, the Germans have been over this race for years, right? And Andy was this next superstar German athlete to come out of the Olympic Games, just an amazingly nice guy, just built to do Ironman racing. I think probably too nice to win Kona, and I might be right there. He's just such a nice guy, and yeah, I set up had a really good swim, set up with a very aggressive bike. I attacked them at about 160 kilometers on the bike, opened up a bit of a gap on Andy and Timo Bracht and a group of, we'd escaped from Craig Alexander's group. We had about a 10-minute lead on. So there was about 8 of us in a breakaway group. And I knew it was going to come down to that group. And Andy Raylert was the guy I was most concerned about, because in Frankfurt in July, he destroyed me in the Ironman. And I was like, man, this guy's going to be tough to beat. So I need a margin of error. And I had about a minute on him off the bike after attacking. And I ran really strong for the first half of the marathon. And then going out into the lava fields, about 16 kilometers, I started losing time to Andy. He started to catch up. And instead of panicking, I think this is the experience. When I talked earlier about Brad Bevan having experience, I think as you're starting to get older, I was 38 at the time, and I'm talking about retirement after that. So I was more experienced at the island. I knew myself. I knew my body over Ironman racing. I won 14 of them now. And I realized Andy was relatively new to Ironman. Even though he was a super talent, he's open to making mistakes like I did. And so I just said, look, let's just relax, take your time, get your nutrition in, let him catch up. He's catching 10 seconds a mile out of you. So he's going to take 7 miles to catch you. So he should catch you. There'll be 10 kilometers left to run. And at least he's with you, and let's have a match race, you know, try and race him. And so I just sort of when I say I relax, I just sort of took the pressure off. I didn't slow down. I just said, you just accept that they may catch you. And it just mentally relaxes you a little bit. And I ran in through the energy lab. I was taking my time through the aid stations, ensuring that I was really fueled up for the onslaught of the last 10 kilometers. And when I came out of the energy lab where I'd calculated it that he should catch me, I was still 30 seconds in front of him. So that's when you start to build on your confidence.
Brilliant.
You know, you're expecting them to catch you a lot earlier. And at that point of an Ironman, you're so emotionally and physically raw and drained that little positives become huge amplified positives. So when he hadn't caught me, I started to think, well, he's tired as well. He's human, and your chest starts to, you start to feel good, and those little positives feed itself and become big like a snowball. And so I just kept running, and he caught me with about 5 kilometers left to run. And at that point, I was starting to feel good. And he ran up onto me, and I'd made a decision in my head that if he ran past me, I was going to go with the pace, no matter what. And he ran up next to me, and he sort of caught me. And I never let him ever make the pass. I always stood one step in front of him. And I tell a true story, and that's the only reason it's important for this race, and why I love Andy so much, is in Frankfurt in July. His younger brother is a guy called Michael Raylert, who'd won 2 70.3 world championships, superstar athlete himself. And we were the year prior in Frankfurt, both Michael and Andy had watched me compete, and I'd lost. I'd had a massive showdown race with Eneko Lanos, and both Eneko and I had blown up, and I got caught by Timo Brucht with a kilometer to go, and I lost the European Championship. And I was sitting in this at the following year. I was sitting in the hotel prior to this Ironman we're about to do the next year, and Andy was racing, and Andy's coach said something like, "Oh, last year was silly what you did. You and Eneko were just stupid, trying to kill each other, and you should have won that race easy. And instead, Brucht came about and beat you, you know." And I was like, look, it's easy in hindsight to say what you should and shouldn't do, but Eneko Lanos and we both wanted to win, and it didn't work, and I can live with that. And I think Michael and Andy could tell I was a bit agitated by the conversation. And Andy went to the buffet with the coach, and Michael said to me, "You know, you're Andy's idol." I was like, "Me?" You know, I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Oh, we used to have your picture on our wall. Like when they started naming all the races I'd done in ITU. I was a junior at this race, and I watched you in this race, and I watched you win in Lausanne, and I watched you." I'm like, "Oh, wow." He's like, "Oh, and for Andy, you're his idol. So I hope you don't get offended by our coach, but we watched you. We came to Frankfurt last year to watch you." I'm like, "Oh, wow." So I remember thinking that. And that was all that was said in Frankfurt in July. So July of 2010. And I remember thinking that when he was catching me in Kona, I remember saying, "Remember, this guy looks up to you. You know, this guy is 7 years younger than you, but you're his idol, right? So you need to be the alpha male. You need to be the champion, because when you're vulnerable and tired and exposed and second guessing yourself, he knows more about my career than I know about his. So he's going to go, oh, Macca did this." And so I was determined to stay the alpha male. So when he caught up to me and we started running together, I started talking to him, saying, "Hey, Andy, good race here. You know, keep the pressure on, keep pushing." And then I gave him a sponge. I said, "Mate, make sure you're ready for that. It's going to be very hard. It's like the Iron War. It's going to be hard." And we shook hands. I said, "No matter what happens, may the best person win." And I just wanted to be that alpha male. And I think, you know, when I made the move on him and I dropped him and I got away and he sort of crumbled, and I was in pieces, right? I was absolutely gone. I was able to hang on and enjoy and win the race. And Andy sort of dropped off. And I made the move with only 1 mile, like 1,600 meters to go. And so it was the latest the race has ever been won. And the first thing I said when I crossed the line, because I tell it with absolute honesty now, is that's the race that Andy should have won. And the only reason he didn't win it was he was out. He second guessed his own ability. And that's just inexperience, right? And that's where experience probably beat inexperience, because he should have won that race and I was gone, and I just outplayed him mentally by being the alpha male, by wishing him the luck. And second place is good race. And I said it in the interview. I said, Andy Raylert will look back on this race in his career. He'll probably win 4 or 5 of these, but this will be the one that got away. But for me, it was a fairy tale ending to my Ironman racing. I kissed my wife at the finish and I retired on the winner's dice from Ironman racing. And and I was done. And that's when we moved back to Australia, and I ultimately moved to Thailand, and I tried to make the Olympic team, but only to satisfy my sponsors, right? Because I'd secured 4 and 5 years worth of sponsors, but for me, as a family, we checked out. You know, I was just going through the motions then to finish the career, and it was all about migrating my focus on family and kids, where they'd given up so much to assist me, and I could be what I liked is that I could the intensity. I'm such an intense individual when I'm focused on something, and I don't like what that intensity brings out of me, to be honest, because I have to wind myself up and make myself, you know, make these rivalries and because that's what I need in order to push myself and go. And I don't like that about myself. So I actually enjoy this part of being on the other side and doing other things.
Very cool. Very cool. I think it's very interesting, obviously, to see behind the stories and hear this now, because obviously what you portray, the picture while you're competing and so on, it's different. Yeah. And then you see it now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Totally.
Like the person, meet the person, you're older now, we reflect different on what we've done. And I think this extremely determination on focus of something. I was a different person when I was 30, 35, when I came to Dubai and started things. And you're so focused on some things, and you only speak about this, and you cannot. I think if you want to be a champion, you need to have that.
It's true.
Focus.
Yeah. And you're so blind. It's like blindfolds, and it's what makes you. It's what makes you successful. It really is. And yeah, it's. I look back now. You realize when you're more. It's not so much reflective. Even when you step away from it now and you see it, and you think, oh, it's not that big. Like enjoy it more. Like it's. But at the time, it was everything, and the intensity. I do miss to some degree, and as I said earlier, of the things that I miss. People go, now you're in retirement, you miss the racing. I said, not really. What I miss is caring about something so much, if that makes any sense. You know, really, really wanting something and committing so much time, energy, focus on something. And that's what I missed. And that's where I think I've fallen into these other things. And I apply that intensity, but with a little bit more reserve, I guess, or a little bit more age put on it. Probably a better way of saying it.
But now you're involved in so many. I think you took that spirit and that involvement and that focus into now so many different things. And I just found a few. Obviously, Super League Triathlon, Bahrain 13, which is an unbelievable project. MX Endurance, the energy, Bollocks energy gel you're involved in. But I think that the big projects are really Bahrain Endurance 13, meeting His Highness Sheikh Nasser, and creating a team. And now obviously the Bahrain McLaren cycling team as well. I think that's just an unbelievable story. And obviously Super League, which I think is just fantastic. I watched a few of the races online. I think it's a super cool format, and it's unbelievable how these guys can race, and these athletes can race. Unreal. So,
I was excited. So when I retired, I basically moved to Thailand and I spearheaded this sports center called Tanyapura. So I was the executive chairman there for 4 years, and I'd met another German. Germans have been so influential in my career.
Always around you,
a German philanthropist called Klaus Heben, who built this $200 million sports center, and I'd met him in 2009 in Monaco, and we just had dinner and we sort of met, and then I wrote a book that he read, and he got in contact with me in 2012 and said, I want you to come to Phuket, and I want you to lead my sports center. I'm building an international school. And I'm like, me? I can't even hang a painting on a wall. I can't build anything. And he's like, no. I want you to do it. And so he was sort of courting me for about 6 months, doing everything he possibly could to get me to move to Phuket and run his center. And he put an offer out that was too crazy not to accept. And I moved my whole family to Phuket. And Jürgen Zach was living there, and made life a lot easier because Jürgen was running a triathlon program out of the center. And I took over the reins and was given a ridiculous budget, and we built a big international school there. We finished the swimming pools. We did a whole bunch of stuff, and I had an unlimited budget. And what that gave me, the platform moving to Asia and being able to go into these meetings with people, but with a budget behind me, really opened my network. And running Tanyapura, we had a few of the sheikhs come from Bahrain into Tanyapura to do some wellness and stuff. and none of them at that time were part of the royal family, but I knew a bit about Bahrain and a few from Abu Dhabi, and then I went to a race in the Philippines as part of the Challenge family. I was helping the Challenge family try and spawn out with racing in Asia, and Sheikh Nasser was competing in the Philippines, and he rang me up, and he had someone ring me up, and we went out for dinner with his younger brother Shaikh Khalid, and we had, we talked about racing and doing what they're going to do, and all these things, and they were young guys, right? They're still young men. And at that point, Sheikh Khalid had just got married, and as part of the celebrating his marriage, he was going to swim from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain. And growing up, one of my closest friends was a marathon swimmer. She swam the English Channel many times, and so I'd been around marathon swimming. In Australia, it's quite a big sport. Yeah. And I was asking a whole bunch of questions about the marathon swim. What was he planning? What were the teams going to run like? And he really was underprepared. Mm-hmm. And I think he read it in my face, and he said, "Do you know much about marathon swimming?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, yeah, I do. I've been on I've been swum with a team that swum from Cuba to Florida. I haven't swum them, but I've been with Susie Moroney." And I said, "Look, this is what I would do. And why don't I bring a whole bunch of athletes across, and we'll swim a kilometer each with you?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, done. That'd be fantastic." So he gave me the rights to organize 30 athletes to come across and swim from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain with him. And I had Jan Frodeno came, and Daniela, and Robbie McEwen came, Baden Cook came, a whole bunch of different sports people, mainly my friends. And we all went across, and we watched Sheikh Khalid swam from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain. And I tell people, it was so hard. Like the man is the real deal, because you can't fake that. Mm-hmm. And they were lucky we were there, because a couple of Olympic sailors from Australia that I brought across were watching the tide charts. And at one point, Sheikh Khalid hadn't been swimming in the same spot for like 3 hours because of the tides. And the sailors said, "Hey, Macca, have you got a tide chart and a chart of the place?" And I said, "Oh," I went up to the front of the boats and got them, and came back. And they put it out on the table, and they were looking at the tide charts, and they were looking at the Gulf area, the way that was. And they basically said, "Oh, you need to turn him this way, send him to the left. He's swimming the wrong way. You need to have him basically swim back towards Saudi Arabia and to the left for the next 3 hours, and then wait for the tide to change, and the tides will bring the rush the water into the Gulf, and he'll get pushed to Bahrain." And they had the whole Bahrain Navy on the front helping him. They were swimming in a straight line because you could see Bahrain. And so I went up to the front and told Sheikh Nasser, I said, "Look, can you come back here and speak with these? We think your brother is swimming the wrong way." And he came back to Sheikh Nasser's. He listened to the Olympic sailors, and he went to the Navy and said, "You need to turn that way." And they said, "No, I think you're wrong." He said, "No, swim that way." And I remember saying to the athletes, "Are you sure you're right? Because if this is wrong, we're in a lot of trouble." And sure enough, he went left, and he swam, and then the tide changed, and boom, he landed in Bahrain. And the king came and met him, and we were just given the keys to the city. We were like the biggest party I've ever been to. It was amazing. And it was that point we sort of merged this friendship with the royal family there in Bahrain. And they were building the endurance center there for the horses and some pools. Yes. And because I was doing Tanyapura, I came in and was consulting on it a lot. And from a different arm as part of my Tanyapura arm. So Tanyapura. And then we came up with the concept of getting into endurance sports, and buying a Tour de France team and buying a triathlon team and doing these sort of things. And Sheikh Nasser, to his credit, is he actioned all the things you want to do. And I tell people, a lot of people are like, "Oh, what's he like?" I'm like, "Look, you're the future king of a country, you're a ruler. And why do I matter?" He does it because he actually believes in health and wellness and bringing change. So investing in sports like that and bringing Ironman to the Gulf and is been his legacy, and it's been really remarkable. And that was sort of when I opted working for the royal family. There was when I said to Tanyapura after 4 years, "Look, I'll just sit on the board, and I want to start moving in and building my own company called the Mana Group that will start to do a bit more of this sports consulting." And that was with Bahrain, and then obviously the McLaren acquisition, and then with Super League, I wanted to build a new concept that was built around around racing triathlon and taking triathlon to the television and marketing it a little bit better. And so I went and raised some capital and launched Super League, and it's just gone from strength to strength. And we've raised a whole bunch of money, and a bunch of investors have come in, and boom, it's just exploded. And so I love what I do. And then we formed the Phoenix Foundation a bit less than 18 months ago with a Polish philanthropist, one of the wealthiest under 40 in Europe. He's a young Polish guy, lives in Switzerland and London, and he wanted to invest in young people doing sport. And I know Seba really well, and he started the Phoenix Foundation, and now we've got the Phoenix Squad, a new team. It's built around age group, short course triathletes, where we'll be bringing potentially to the Middle East a project very similar to the sub 2 hour marathon project that the runners did. We're going to do that around the Ironman distance, but very, very different, where we want to see how fast all things, if you follow all the rules of each individual sport, what is breaking 7 hours possible for an Ironman, or is breaking 8 hours possible for the women. So going to a venue somewhere in the Middle East and delivering that with in the same way they did with the Ineos deal, as part of the Phoenix project, to draw awareness to athlete stars and athlete heroes, and inspiring young kids to pursue sport. Because the drop-off rate in sport now globally, if people aren't aware, is that it's down 15% on what it was in the 90s amongst young kids. Less kids are doing sport, competitive sport now, than they ever were. And that's a tragedy. You know, everyone's talking about esports and that. Yeah, they're great, but your kids being active, and sport is beautiful. And not just the competitive side, it's the friendships that are born out of sport, it's the health benefits that are born out of sport. And I think it's important to move in this direction, and it's something I enjoy doing.
Very good. No, very good. And I think congratulations to all of what you have achieved, and I think what you're doing. And I think that as well, maybe the Forbes title of giving this to be a person who really gives back to the sports, and with all the activities, that's really great. And it has done a great impact, obviously, for the Middle East region. And I've had the pleasure to meet Sheikh Nasser and his brother. I can't remember, maybe 8-9 years back, when they got the first bikes, and we got to start this whole story. That was really fantastic. And now we've seen Dubai has announced they want to become one of the most bike-friendly cities in the world. And we have obviously our own, His Highness Sheikh Hamdan, who is very close to Sheikh Nasser. So they are really bouncing off ideas and getting the Middle East region to be a sports place. Yeah. And I think
it's brilliant. Well, you have the perfect weather in those European winters, like Dubai and this part of the world. You live there, and most of the people that you guys know it, but it's stunning. It's absolutely beautiful, the desert, and it's a great place to base and a great place to do a lot of work. And the facilities now are first class. Like as a professional team, you got to make sure that you tick all the boxes that you can prepare properly. Maybe in the 90s, Dubai didn't have that, but Dubai has all of that now, as has Bahrain. You can go there, base there, everything's available. And in fact, it's not only do they have it, it's probably in better condition and better quality than anywhere else in the world. And I think these young leaders are doing an amazing job in moving in this direction. It's amazing.
Yeah, very cool. Listen, I think we have enough talk for another talk. And number 2, number 3, number 4. I think we have to make this a series, because I think there's lots of. But I want to be respectful of your time. No, it's amazing, Chris. So I think you have done an amazing part 1 of your career with all the sports, and now I think you're right in the middle. You're right focused on what you're going to do now in the future, and I'm really excited. I unfortunately, I heard you can't visit the Middle East for another 6-7 months. I think you have to stay in Australia.
I have to stay in Australia, where they said till July of next year, 2021. But there's talk that our Prime Minister may open the borders in February, or reduce the difficulty of traveling. So I'm taking this time. My office is in London. We have an office in Singapore and an office in London. So I usually start work now about 5 as London starts to open up, 6 o'clock, 7, and I sort of work until about 1 a.m, and I get to sleep in. But I'm enjoying taking, I say to a lot of the people that are struggling with it, how many times in your life have you said, I just wish I could just have some time off to spend with the family and not have, well, take that time now. It's forced upon you. And I'm really enjoying taking my kids to school, because they're the things that at times when I'm working so hard or doing things that I think, I wish I could do that a lot more. And I don't want to let this opportunity go. So I'm trying to be positive with it all and enjoy the staying in the one spot time, which is nice.
Very good. Is there one thing, if people look at your career and look about you as a person, what would you want them to say about you, and what do you want to leave behind if you had one thing you want to be remembered for?
I think I was authentic, and the authenticity. I had no filters in the modern era where everything's put through filters and changed, and everyone's not really. I think I was real. I wore my heart on my sleeve. I never took a backward step if I was challenged. I never ever took a backward step, and I was just authentic. I think that what you see is what you get. I wasn't trying to be anything else. I wasn't trying to be somebody else. I wasn't faking it. I wasn't doing things because of marketing reasons. For me, it was all about, probably getting the approval of my father, so to some degree, and just going out and trying to be, realizing I had a finite amount of time in this sport and delivering in that time, because I didn't want to be an older guy that said I would have, could have, should have. I did. So I think that's how I want to be remembered, as a guy that, was just real. That what you saw is what you got.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, thank you very much. And I see you're a super busy guy with all the things you're doing, looking after your family, all the other projects. And I really appreciate that you take the time to speak to me. I'm looking forward to see you in Dubai or Bahrain or wherever. And then maybe we can go out for dinner and talk a bit more about things. And maybe there's some more plans you have for Dubai and for the region. So I'm always open to help. And maybe we go for a nice bike ride on the Al Qudra cycle track or whatever. So thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to getting to Dubai, and I'll take you up on going out for dinner. It'd be wonderful. Good to see you guys. I love it. So cheers.
Thank you very much. Next week, we're going to speak to the guys from Italia all about saddles. If you have any questions for saddles, we invited the pro. So I'm looking forward to see you next week. And thanks for listening. Thank you, Macca. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.